much. Good afternoon, everyone, and good night for those joining us far away from Hamilton. For the next couple minutes, I'd like just to provide you brief information about the background for social system evidence. Starting, you may know that one-stop shops of pre-appraised synthesized research evidence are one of several ways that we can facilitate evidence-informed policymaking. And we've been doing this for several years with developing and managing health system evidence. And over the years, it became apparent that how important these types of one-stop shop of research evidence are important to policymakers, stakeholders, but also to all of McMaster Health Forum's programs. For instance, whenever we receive an urgent request to do a rapid response, or when we host a stakeholder dialogue and we need to produce an evidence brief, or when we host a citizen panel, and again, we need to produce a citizen brief which provide the best available research evidence to citizens, we realize how important having a one-stop shop of research evidence is. And over the past couple of years, we've gradually expanded the work of the McMaster Health Forum beyond the health system, and we do this under Forum Plus. And via Forum Plus, we're building on the forum's expertise in advancing human and societal health and well-being in our efforts to strengthen social systems. And in other words, to get the right programs, services, and products to the people who need them. And we do this at Forum Plus by providing the best available research evidence, but also using the best information from systematically elicited citizen values and stakeholder insights. So as we developed Forum Plus and we expanded beyond the health system, we realized the need to develop a tool, a platform like social systems evidence. So we couldn't really identify a one-stop shop in the broad social system space when we were seeking to develop some citizen-targeted content about the social aspects of aging. And we were doing this as part of a larger initiative at McMaster University called the McMaster Optimal Aging Portal. So we knew there were some efforts to develop and keep high-quality syntheses in single online spaces like they do at the Campbell Library or at the Wetworks Centres in the UK, or perhaps at the International Initiatives for Impact Evaluation. But there was no comprehensive source of all syntheses that were pre-appraised and indexed in ways that are easy to access, but also indexed in a way that's meaningful for policymakers and stakeholders from a variety of program and service areas. So as we realized this, we said, well, we need to build something similar to health system evidence in the social system space. And as we started to develop social system evidence, we tried to learn from existing approaches and the work and the years of experience with health system evidence. So we build on well-defined methods to harvest content, like we did for health system evidence. We were harvesting content from several databases like PubMed, Medline, Cochrane, and many others. We also developed some well-defined methods to conduct eligibility assessment. So we wanted to make sure that the content that was going to social system evidence was relevant in terms of the program and service areas, in terms of the document types that we were integrating. And also we needed ways and methods to categorize eligible documents. So to find a way to develop a taxonomy that we could use to index all the content. And lastly, we needed some well-defined methods to curate and add value to the content. For instance, one way of doing this is to do a quality appraisal of the systematic reviews, or to provide the individual study links for each systematic review that's included in the database. So for instance, if we included a systematic review based on 15 studies, then we provide the links for the individual 15 studies as well. Another thing that we build on is we build on an established team and processes for executing these methods. And also we build on a custom built online admin system and user interface like a search engine that could be used and applied for social system evidence. But very importantly, we needed a way to meaningfully organize all this information coming from many, many domains and areas. So we developed and refined a taxonomy, and this was done iteratively through multiple key informant interviews with international experts in a variety of sectors and domains. And basically, the way we developed the taxonomy, we organize the content in three ways. Those of you who are familiar with health system evidence will be familiar with the first way, which is the social system arrangement. So we try to index the content based on governance, funding, and delivery arrangements, as well as implementation considerations. The second way we organize the content is via the Sustainable Development Goals. And lastly, we organize the content based on 20 program and service areas. And in recent months, what we try to do is to expand the work we do at Social System Evidence and to ensure that we cover the 17 SDGs, especially those that are relevant to the environment, such as SDG number 7, which looks at energy, 13, climate action, 14, life below water, and 15, life on land. And this is where our colleague Peter comes into play with his group at the Monash University. And I'll pass the microphone to Peter to share his thoughts and insights in trying to expand the work of social system evidence into the broader environmental sector. So, Peter, it's very late in Australia. Thank you for joining us. So I'll pass the microphone to you so you can share some of your key insights.
Thanks very much, FP, and I hope everyone's hearing me well. It's actually very early here, so good morning to anyone who may have joined me at 5 a.m. Australian time, and good afternoon and evening to those in Canada and the Northern Hemisphere. And I'd like to thank everyone at the McMaster team for this opportunity to talk about how we're working together on social systems evidence. Just before I get into the top 10, I just want to give you a brief background on Monash Sustainable Development Institute, which, as its name suggests, is dedicated to, I guess, planetary health in all its forms, and as reflected by their Sustainable Development Goals. We just released our annual impact report for 2018, and if you'd like to come and visit our website, you can download it and read about all the work we do, but I'm obviously going to focus on social systems evidence. Just want to say a few words about the collaboration. I've worked with John Lavis and his team for over 10 years and very well familiar with their leadership in health systems evidence and their leadership generally in evidence platforms and evidence into policy initiatives. And this is one of those partnerships that's a real win-win, because MSDI has some content matter expertise in the areas that FP just mentioned, Sustainable Development Goals 7 and 13 to 15. We've got a subsidiary institute called Climate Works, which works very hard around climate action. Our chair, John Thwaites, sits on the Leadership Council of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And Monash University, being Australia's largest university, also has quite a lot of expertise around biodiversity and environmental disciplines. So we're really thrilled to be partnering with the team in Canada, notwithstanding the time zone differences, and we're really enjoying the collaboration so far. So let's get into the top 10, and I guess the obvious point to start at is the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And this first insight really is about 3 pillars that make the SDGs work, and which were used similarly to frame the Millennium Development Goals. And when you think about it, to set 17 goals across the world of such scale and such complexity, you need to have a deep understanding of the big global challenges around the world. And for that understanding, you need data analytics. You need people who can help you quantify the nature and the scope and the trajectory of these complex problems around the world. And one obvious example is the IPCC report into climate action. You can see all the work that has gone into that, and that's happening 16, 17 times over to frame the Sustainable Development Goals. And then once you've articulated those challenges and understood the problems, you've got to get global consensus on the goals and the 169 underlying targets. And the SDGs were ratified by the UN in September 2015 and officially launched on January the 1st, 2016. So once you've got those two things in place, you've got the framework for accountability and reporting that you need. And that's the targets that governments around the world sign up to, things like the Paris Agreement. And those targets enable governments to monitor the implementation and outcome of SDG policies, and importantly, be held accountable for these also. So then once you've got the agenda, and the SDGs are the agenda, you need policymakers across the world to create or take advantage of opportunities for enacting that agenda through actions that they take. And there's three ingredients there as well. Firstly, politicians need to be convinced that there are viable policy options. If you think about a simple example, what can we do about overuse of plastic? Well, we might introduce legislation to ban plastic bags and reduce use of single-use plastics. Secondly, you have to have support for these policy positions, both within government, ideally across the floor of government, but also within the wider community. And we can see with the example of plastic, the community's on board, and they generally around the world, including in Australia, have quite enthusiastically adopted recycling initiatives and reducing use of plastic, so they get it. And when you know that you've got those conducive politics, you can make a political commitment. You can launch a policy. You can stand up and say, we're going to do this, and it gives you the license to be able to do that. And in some cases, industry might take the lead and impose plastic bans of their own. Now, if we head to point number 3, and we return to the data that underpins the Sustainable Development Goals, what we need to do now is we need to link the data describing problems and implementation progress to the evidence about what the options are and the ways that we can implement them. And this is really where social systems evidence comes in. Social systems evidence is the platform that links the Sustainable Development Goals, which are, after all, outcomes or aspirations, with the best available evidence. And that evidence can be thought of in 3 key areas. There's evidence about the what, the benefits, harms, cost effectiveness, and stakeholder experiences with options to address the problem. And importantly, you can find out about the what globally, but you can also use the country filters to find out about what evidence might exist in your setting, including at the level of the studies within the reviews on the platform. Then there's evidence about the how. What are the enabling governance, financial and delivery arrangements for the selected options or for the interventions of interest? And finally, there's evidence about the how implemented. How do you actually get these things into practice to ensure that policy and practice interventions ultimately reach those who need them, which is the overarching aim of both health systems and social systems evidence and the associated activities and strategies that are offered by the McMaster and the Monash University teams. Moving to point 4, this is a really interesting emerging field, and it really deals with the concept of interaction effects. If you think about the SDGs, there's 169 targets and there's 17 goals. So one of the things that people need to be aware of in policy and practice settings is that if you're taking action on one SDG target, you might influence other targets. And this could be in a positive direction, it could be in a counteractive or negative direction, or it may have a neutral effect. Now, the evidence in social systems evidence at the moment really focuses on the main effects, as we saw in the previous slide. What are the options? how do you implement them, and how do they work? But it's useful to keep in mind this emerging science of the possibility of interaction effects, which has been studied by organisations such as the International Science Council, the International Network for Government Scientific Advice, and the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. You can see a few examples on the left there of what they call interaction effects, and that in this example they're broken into synergy pairs and trade-off pairs. And you can see that if you're, for example, doing something about sustainable cities and communities, you're probably going to be amplifying efforts around climate change, because you're going to be using building materials that reduce use of CO2 emitting power, etc., etc. But on the other hand, if you're taking action to reduce inequalities, for example, you can't necessarily square that off with sustainable consumption, because some parts of the world who have been in resource poor settings are going to use more resources. And this is the concept of interaction effects. And those groups that I mentioned have actually quantified those effects on a scale of +3, which is indivisible, to -3, which is competing. So, an indivisible example would be if you end discrimination against women and girls, you're going to be ensuring women's full and effective participation for leadership, which means that you're achieving actually 2 targets in one. But cancelling mean, as you've seen in the previous example, full protection of natural reserves means you can't have public access for recreation. And what that means for people in government is that rather than thinking in single portfolios, they need to have perhaps more of a system lens and a knowledge of the interaction effects, and a knowledge that if I'm doing something in policy area A, it might be worth speaking to portfolio area G to make sure that we're aware of what each other's doing. So that's something to keep in mind as you access and use the evidence in the Social Systems Evidence Platform. Now I want to talk a little bit about the searching function, which FP touched on, and the filtering options. And I think this is a real advantage of social systems evidence. It addresses major limitations of open internet searching for evidence about options and implementation strategies. Open searching on the internet through a web browser to find information remains a default option for many in policy and other organisations. And usually the reason for that is we haven't got time to dig deeper. We need to find something fast. But what is less understood about those searches is that they're generally engineered around what is called an N of 1 approach. They're trying to find one record that best matches your search query from everything on the internet. And that everything includes research, but it also includes things that are not research, and it's not systematically conducted or synthesized or independently quality appraised or packaged for easy consumption. And therefore, I would argue that relying on open internet searching to find evidence about options and implementation strategies is enormously risky, and it's potentially wasteful if you're subsequently implementing a strategy for which there is not a strong evidence base. And social systems evidence focuses only on review level evidence. And by doing that, you get 2 complementary advantages. You get better evidence and you have much less volume to deal with. So let's talk about better evidence. So because reviews consolidate knowledge from multiple research studies, they're the most reliable form of research for developing policy and practice initiatives. And they're a very efficient way to examine whether different options and strategies may work best in different contexts. And the beauty of social systems evidence is that all the work of searching and selecting and indexing is done by people like FP and myself and our teams. And the users can therefore access that higher credibility knowledge in the same time that it takes to do an open internet search. And then the second advantage is the much lower volume of review level evidence when compared to primary studies. If you take away all of the non-research things on the internet, you've still got around about an estimated 60 million published peer-reviewed studies in the world, and they're being added to it around about 5 to 5,500 per day. So there's enormous volumes of evidence, classic needle in a haystack concept. And I like to think about this social systems evidence as a funnel, where what we've actually done is we've narrowed the inlet to the funnel by really focusing just on reviews and pre-appraising those reviews, and we've widened the outlet from that N of 1 to all of the evidence that matches your query that's available. And so in those ways, you can access credible evidence in a much more efficient manner than open internet searching. And the reason for this presentation, obviously, is that we're now adding content to complete coverage of the 17 SDGs through this collaboration that came into effect late last year. We've spent the early part of this year developing those taxonomies that FP mentioned at the start, covering climate change, energy, the environment, and natural resources. And this will enable us to index content pertaining to SDGs 7 and 13 to 15. And we are currently in the process of doing that with a view to uploading and completing coverage of SDGs by later this year, around September or October. And I just want to share a couple of insights into what we found as someone who's had a background predominantly in health and really is starting to understand what the evidence is like in these environmental and other social systems areas. So the first insight is that there are a lot of groups who have spent quite a lot of time tailoring review methods to social systems. So one of the concerns around reviews in areas outside of health, given that health was the first area to really undertake those reviews, some people have a concern that you can't apply those Cochrane health-focused drug trial type review methodologies to environmental concepts such as, green wedges or carbon sequestration. But there's groups around the world, such as the Collaboration for Environmental Evidence, who've actually developed and developed manuals around guidelines and standards for evidence synthesis in areas such as the environment. And they look, as you can see, very much like the Cochrane sort of guidelines for how you do a review. So there are review methods out there that are tailored to social systems. And the other point, which is really encouraging, is that there's a lot of evidence out there in areas that we are indexing at the moment: conservation, environmental management, biodiversity. I've just put one example on the slide there from a website called Conservation Evidence, which you can have a look at, and you can see the lists there and the green lights indicating the strength of the evidence. And there are some interventions there with over 50 and in some cases over 100 supporting studies around the effectiveness of particular interventions. So I think there are two misconceptions potentially amongst people who are unfamiliar with the review space or review science. And the first is that you can't do systematic reviews of non-health topics. And the second is, well, there's not many reviews out there. And I know that when the team started health systems evidence, people were thinking that there weren't a lot of reviews around how to implement things into practice and policy. And I checked yesterday, and I think health systems evidence is just ticking over 16,000 records. So there's plenty of synthesized evidence out there, but as I said before, not as much as primary studies. I now want to focus on the way that you can search social systems evidence. And I think that it's really important to understand that the way the platform has been constructed is very much from a real world perspective rather than an academic perspective. If you've had the pleasure of looking at academic taxonomies and the way that things are indexed in academic scientific databases, they're highly technical and they require a lot of specialist knowledge to understand the terminology. Social systems evidence is not like that. It's designed with a view to putting yourself in the position of a policymaker who might be in a portfolio area. But really importantly, the filters can be stacked on top of each other to really focus your search and search through multiple lenses. And one of the insights that John Lavis and myself have had from working through these taxonomies is how powerful that can be. Because if you're in a government portfolio area, or if you're a policymaker, you tend to think in terms of interventions. What can I do? What can I announce? What can I implement to solve this problem? And so your first entry point into social systems evidence might be, well, here I am in the transportation ministry. I wonder what evidence exists in social systems evidence around transportation. And there's some second level headings that aren't on this slide. Or I'm in the infrastructure ministry, or the housing ministry, or the recreation portfolio. So this allows you to sort evidence by intervention or portfolio area. But as I said at the start, the SDGs and the SDG targets are actually outcomes. And so you might, if you're operating in the Sustainable Development Solutions Network or the SDG space, you might think, well, what can I do to achieve quality education? And so you might search by those outcomes. And you can actually do both. So you can say, well, I'm in the transport ministry and I want to look at access to schools. How do people get to schools better? So I might click on transportation, and I might also say, well, that really is about quality education. It's about physical access to education. So I'm going to click SDG 4 and filter also by quality education. And what you might do optimally, there is an open search function as well. So you can actually say, let's look at transport, or getting to school, or a very simple Boolean search term. And then you can then filter your results by transport portfolio, quality education. In this case, I've also added a filter in this example to say, well, I'm also located in Australia or Canada. I wonder what reviews contain primary studies from those two countries, and I can filter down to that level. And I ran this example in a couple of minutes. It took about the same amount of time as an open internet search, and I found 2 records by using those 2 filters and a simple search term. So that's a really great example of how you can spend the same amount of time but get higher quality and more relevant research using those multiple filters. It takes a bit of iteration. Sometimes you have to fiddle around with your search terms. You might find that there's a particular language that does or doesn't work, or you can just start with the filters and not have a search term at all. You can just filter the existing records by transport portfolio and education as an outcome. So I think that's a really amazing design feature that has clearly been developed over the many years that health systems evidence has been in existence, and it's now being applied to this area of social systems. So it's very exciting for people who are in the sustainable development space. Now I'm going to talk about 2 of the groups, the two broad groups that use social systems evidence. And obviously the first is knowledge users, people in policy settings, people who want to know about options, cost effectiveness, trade-offs, and implementation strategies. And there are 3 ways that knowledge users can use social systems evidence. The first is the way that I just described, where you're in a portfolio area and you want to just find out one review. You want to quickly just get some information about something. I wonder if there's any evidence around this. So that's a sort of, evidence in my country, and I'm just showing you a record there on the left of FP mentioned that the primary studies are hyperlinked. So if I'm in Australia, I click on any of those underlined links there, and I can go straight to the Australian studies within that review record. So that takes minutes. The other thing you might be doing is you might be a knowledge user who's also a knowledge creator. You might be constructing a policy brief or a report for government, and you may need to access some evidence alongside other inputs like data or qualitative information or technical information about a particular policy initiative. And obviously, social systems evidence is great for that. It provides you all the citations, and where the documents are freely available, you can click through to access them. But where the Social Systems Evidence team and McMaster in Canada and MSDI down here in Melbourne, Australia, come in is that we can do all that for you and also provide a context-specific commentary, an interpretation of the evidence and what it means. And we've done that for a number of years down here at Monash University, and obviously the team and McMaster are very experienced in doing that also. We've done reviews across the health services as well as environmental areas even before this collaboration began, and I've just highlighted one there around contained deposit recycling that we did for the New South Wales government. And obviously the McMaster team through the Optimal Aging portal have been doing rapid syntheses as well. And we have a sort of a graded review product line, if you like, which sort of starts at a 3-day review and goes all the way through to a 90-day review. And those reviews synthesize the available evidence through SSE and sometimes from other sources, including subscription-only evidence or articles that might be behind subscription portals and paywalls. And we also interview people on the ground to juxtapose that evidence with real-world insights into how particular interventions may have played out locally. So we did a review on industrial ecology where we spoke to some people who had actually been involved in industrial ecology entrepreneurship in Australia, and that gave a real-world flavour to, well, that's what the literature says, but what's happening on the ground. And obviously that's a graded format. At the 3 and 10-day review, you get very little or none of that. You really just get the evidence synthesis. But when you get into the 30, 60 and 90-day reviews, there's an increasingly large amount of stakeholder consultation at individual and possibly at small group levels. And that is used to really render a rich understanding of what the evidence means in the local political and other contexts. And the 90-day reviews may even include interjurisdictional scans where you're actually looking at not only how has the policy played out locally, but what about other jurisdictions or provinces in Canada or states in Australia, what have they done and what's worked or what's worked around the world. And that in turn leads to other activities that are coordinated by the forum team, such as structured dialogues with leaders to deliberate on next steps for policy, which have been very well established through the McMaster Health Forum for over a decade now. Down here in Australia at Behaviour Works, which is where I'm housed within the Monash Sustainable Development Institute, we also do small behaviour change pilot trials. So once we've deliberated upon what the action might be in a particular area, we work very closely with with state governments across numerous states in Australia to actually do field trials of interventions. We've done trials of using behaviour change strategies to optimise immunisation uptake. We've done statewide trials. We've done statewide campaigns around appropriate use of emergency services, and we've done a number of trials in the environment space as well around things like littering and industrial waste and recycling. And again, if you drill into the MSDI website, you'll be able to read about those trials. Now I want to talk a little bit about knowledge creators, and I've done a lot of work in research strategy and research strategy planning and evidence mapping in previous academic lives. And social systems evidence has a real role in setting a global sustainability research agenda. And in particular, you'll notice if you do drill into the platform, 2 of the evidence types that you can look for are reviews in preparation and reviews in progress. And that tells you not only obviously what's being published, but you can understand what work might be going on or what reviews might have been registered. Those of you who are familiar with doing reviews would know that there are platforms a little bit like trial platforms where you can register your review title. Prospero is one of the bigger ones. And What that's designed to do is to really help people not duplicate effort. But let's return to the content that's already on SSE that is published. That's giving us a map of research and a map of what interventions have and have not been examined in relation to which outcomes at the review level, which, as we discussed earlier, is the the most robust level for translation into practice and policy. And so we've got a map of where the research exists and where it doesn't exist. If you're a university or a researcher within a university and you're planning a review, you can be strategic about it by having a look at what's already out there. The last thing you want to do, it's the sort of the nightmare of a PhD student, is I'm about to do a review. Oh, look, someone's done that exact review that I planned. Well, then you can change tack. You can focus on other outcomes. You can broaden your review, and you can add to knowledge rather than reproducing something that's already there. And you can fill evidence gaps by doing that. The other thing that might happen is you might discover that there's a review in progress, which is a little bit similar to the one you're planning. And this offers an opportunity for collaboration across settings and across the world to pool resources and make an existing review either quicker or more comprehensive. And this is the model that Cochrane has adopted around the world, where you have review groups that assemble around particular topics. Now, we're not really at that stage in social systems evidence, but I believe this platform and its connection to the Sustainable Development Solutions Network will really offer a powerful opportunity for that collaboration and for those groups to assemble. Because the last thing we want to do with limited research resources is have a team down here in Melbourne working on a review that's very, very similar to a review that a team in Canada is working on. If you search around those reviews and find the reviews in preparation progress, that can connect you to other teams who are working in that space, and that offers either an opportunity to work together on the same review or an opportunity to pivot and alter your review topic such that you're not reproducing work that someone else is already doing. So for insight number 10, I'm going to throw back to FP because we're going to talk a little bit about the Partners in Evidence-driven Rapid Learning in Social Systems, or the PERLSS initiative. And this is an example of an initiative that's using social systems evidence to support achievement of the SDGs. So I'm going to throw to FP, who can talk a little bit more about PERLSS, and then we'll wrap up and take questions. So FP, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. So as the last top 10 insight for today is that really SSC can be used as an incredible platform to create and enable partnership that support evidence-informed policy making about the SDGs. And we're currently doing this internationally through PERLSS, which is a network called Evidence-driven Rapid Learning in Social Systems, PERLSS. So essentially, we're helping to support evidence-informed policy making about the SDGs in 14 countries. So it's a global network. And this network, PERLSS, is currently including 70 people from across 27 organizations. So quite a large network bringing policymakers and stakeholders together. And the overarching objective of PERLSS is to try to achieve the non-health SDGs. So help to support the achievement of these non-health SDGs using the best available research evidence, as well as citizens' values and stakeholder insights. So perhaps to talk a little bit more about PERLSS, we have with us John Levis, who's the director of the McMaster Health Forum. And John, perhaps you'd like to add a couple of other comments about this initiative and also about SSC. So John, can you test your microphone?
Yes, absolutely. Can you hear me okay, FP?
Perfect.
Great, super. So thanks very much, and thank you, Peter, for the presentation. Yeah, so we're very, very excited about PERLSS, and PERLSS would not be possible were it not for social systems evidence. So as FP mentioned, this is 14 teams around the globe. About half of them are based in Africa, 3 are based in Latin America, and then we also have partners in the United Kingdom, Lebanon, and Oman. So these are all teams that are committed to adapting and iteratively improving approaches that have seemed to get a lot of traction in health and trying to use them across sectors. And they, like those working in health, find that the best place to start is with synthesized evidence. And so instead of having to go to dozens of different sites and search many bibliographic databases, they can now go to social systems evidence and rapidly find reviews and economic evaluations. They are, like the forum, like MSDI, producing rapid syntheses of research in short timelines. They're preparing citizen briefs and convening citizen panels to elicit the values that citizens believe should drive decision making. And they're preparing evidence briefs and convening stakeholder dialogues to really put the research evidence alongside the tacit and experiential knowledge of the key players in the system on whatever the topic in play is. So we're really thrilled that PERLSS can benefit from social systems evidence, and we're already seeing a lot of usage by folks across those 14 countries. I guess the other things that I'd say moving beyond slide 10 are first just emphasize that we're thrilled with the partnership with the Monash Sustainable Development Institute for many reasons. One of them being this tight connection to the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. So they are connected to partners globally that are far beyond our reach. And so we're thrilled to be able to leverage those partnerships to get social systems evidence in front of a much more diverse array of potential users than we could. One of the many other reasons why we're thrilled with the partnership is the potential to bring in the content in these 4 new areas where we just don't have the experience and so on, but they have a lot of it. So that's the work on the environment, on climate action, and so on. So we're thrilled that we are soon going to be able to highlight all of the rich number of systematic reviews in these other areas that social systems evidence hasn't been able to capture until now. And then that will mean that SSE is speaking to the full spectrum of non-health SDGs. So it's a pretty extraordinary development. I guess 2 other comments. One is just that already, even before we add those 4 new content areas, social systems evidence is, I think, just shy of 2,500 systematic reviews already. So this is a space where a lot of people said there's not much synthesized evidence, but in the less than a year that we've been operating, we're already up to more than 2,500 systematic reviews. And I anticipate that number will climb very dramatically with MSDI coming on board. And then the final comment is I just want to emphasize a point that Peter made in slide 7, which maybe I'm slow and it took me a while to come to. I don't know if we can cycle back to slide 7, but our team is used to coming into things more from an intervention lens. And that's why we initially developed the taxonomy of the 16 government sectors or program areas. And now with MSDI, we're able to add the additional ones. And what took me a long time to realize is, and it's so obvious if you know the SDGs really well and you work with them every day, but they're focused on outcomes. And there's many paths to those outcomes. And so I've increasingly realized that to really get the most value out of social systems evidence, you almost have to think on both tracks. So Peter's final column of optimally use multiple lenses, I think, is right. That if you're trying to have an impact on a particular SDG, you often need to think, well, are we going to come at it more from the perspective of housing, of infrastructure, of public safety and justice, of recreation? And so it's really the combination that is very, very powerful. So again, I'm probably a bit slower than most in coming to that realization, but unlike in health, where we often come in through the interventions, In the SDG space, I think we're coming in through a combination of the SDG and the government areas, government sectors and program areas. So those are my quick comments. And again, I can't emphasize enough how thrilled we are with the partnership with the Monash Sustainable Development Institute, and how amazing it will be to have all of this new content added. With one of my volunteer hats on, I sit on the board of the Georgian Bay Association, which is very focused on water, land, and forest. And I've started to brag that I'll soon be able to bring review level evidence to our board conversations. So, and that's made possible by MSDI through the leadership of Peter and his colleagues. So that's it for me. I'll just pass it back maybe to Steve to move us into the Q&A session.
Thanks, John. So certainly if anybody has any questions after that presentation, if you could please use the chat box on the bottom right, and then we'll address them to the panelists. But there's not any questions there currently, so I just wanted to give FP a quick chance to comment as well on Peter's discussion to see if you had any additional points that you wanted to raise.
Perhaps just one comment is how rich the content is on social system evidence. I was just working today on the monthly update, so the new reviews that will be added in by the end of the month, and it's just fantastic, the diversity in terms of program and service areas, and also SDGs covered, and it makes you realize how important it is to, if we want to address global problems, we need to think about a very comprehensive pan-governmental approach. And clearly, social system evidence is a fantastic platform to inform these actions to address global problems.
Great, thanks, FP. All right, so if anybody has any questions, please do use the chat box in the bottom right. And we certainly encourage everybody to go and check out social systems evidence as well, just to browse and see the content that's there. And as FP and Peter both mentioned, we're certainly going to be adding much more content in the months to come as well. So it'll be a growing platform that should be of great use to policymakers, researchers, and others. So we do have one question here that about since launching SSE, do we have any examples of how policymakers have used evidence they've found via SSE to inform policymaking? And I guess potentially FP, we could consider that in relation to health systems evidence as well, since that platform has been around longer.
Would be some of the work we did with our rapid response program. So we did some rapid reviews on in the education sector and a few other sectors that are beyond the health sector. So certainly we were able to rapidly go in and use social system evidence to prepare very brief, synthesized documents highlighting the best available research evidence. And we did that with the Ministry of Education in Ontario, producing a few rapid syntheses on 21st century's learning skills. So clearly, it's been we saved quite some time by using social system evidence, which really highlights the pre-appraised research evidence instead of running searches in more traditional databases.
So I can comment on the review that we did on container deposit schemes, although I should emphasise it predated the social systems evidence, but it was a real, a bit of an aha moment for me, who'd spent all of my professional career researching health and health systems. We had a request from the New South Wales government, so New South Wales is the most heavily populated state in Australia, to examine container deposit schemes around the world. And that review was very impactful in the development of the New South Wales container deposit refund scheme policy and framework, which has now been implemented. And in particular, the focus of that review was how do the government-backed container deposit schemes stack up in terms of sustainability against industry-backed ones. So one of the controversies with container deposit schemes is that the beverage industry is traditionally quite opposed to them because it does create an impost on them. But what that review found was that the industry-led schemes that were outside of government regulation did not have the yields that they predicted. They were in many cases, they didn't last for many years. Conversely, the government legislated schemes, in fact, South Australia introduced one in 1976, and I think some Canadian provinces were also amongst the world leaders. Those schemes have been in operation for now over 40 years. So that review was very influential in doing that thing that is sometimes needed, is to give governments and government departments some evidence to support a particular position, particularly when they're engaging in a debate with either the wider community or in this case the beverage industry. So that's one example, and we've done numerous other environmental reviews around industrial ecology, around reducing littering, around lots of social systems areas, and SSE is going to amplify and accelerate those efforts in areas that we've been operating for a number of years.
Thanks. And perhaps another example of the impact that social system evidence had is we've been using the reviews featured in social system evidence to produce citizen-oriented content for the McMaster Optimal Aging portal. So we're finding reviews that are relevant to the social aspects of aging, and based on those reviews, we produce evidence summaries, blog posts, and other types of content that can be used by citizens, so John and Mary from Main Street, so that they can inform their activities and their decisions. And we've done these types of content on so many different sectors and program areas: education, transportation, social engagement, civic engagement, and so on. So social system evidence has been extremely useful to also inform citizens.
Thanks, FP and Peter. So we have another comment/question that they're saying that it sounds like the examples we provided are largely based on commission reviews. So obviously the commission reviews are ones where we certainly know that it's been used, but the question is whether we hear from people about how they've used health systems evidence and social systems evidence to inform their policy activities as well. So, I mean, certainly we know that a lot of people are using these sites, but FP, perhaps you want to answer that?
That's certainly something we'll probably need to explore a bit further. It's still social system is still in a beta stage. We're hoping to, with the expanded version of SSC launching in the next couple of weeks, mostly in September, to be more specific, we'll be able to connect with the users and perhaps assess their use of social system evidence beyond the commission rapid responses that we could do, or the type of products that we do at the forum.
So one proxy measure of that would be, FP, maybe you can mention the mailing list, how many people you've got on the mailing list, because you do curate a mailing list that users can tailor for their own area of interest.
Yeah, that's right. So perhaps that's something, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but people who are interested in social system evidence can run searches and save their searches and create their own curated searches that are really adapted to their own specific interest. So I don't have the specific numbers in front of me right now, but that's something that can be done.
Great. And certainly I know that we've done from the forum, and I'm sure that we'll continue to do more of it, but we've done training for a number of different policymakers, researchers, people working in kind of policy space on health systems evidence, and I'm sure we will on social systems evidence, and just about how to make the best use of evidence in policy, in finding policy decisions as well. So we do know that there's people using it, and we know that they're using it for their research and for policy assessments, but obviously getting, the details of exactly the scope of that work is a little different. But sort of as a follow-up to somebody saying that they're interested as a government knowledge officer with a personal interest in the innovation space, and they say that Australia will be building a national circular economy hub, and they see that SSE and register space as a sort of approach could be relevant across that, especially in light of the comments on container deposit schemes. Peter, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I'm just having a look at that I'm just having a look at that question text just so I can see the context. Yeah, absolutely. So we've got pretty strong links to organisations. Well, we're certainly aware of organisations like the What Works movement in the UK, and there's another one called GovLab in the United States, and we are having national conversations around waste in particular, but there's certainly that National Circular Economy Hub is something that I'll thank you for putting that link there. I will follow up on that, and if the questioner would like to contact me directly, I'll just flick back to we've got an email address there, or you can email me at peter.bragge at monash.edu, and I'll be happy to follow that up perhaps a little later in the morning. But actually, it's great to see someone from Australia joined us at 5 a.m. So thank you very much, Melanie, I think it is.
Great.
An early riser.
Thanks very much for everybody. Like Peter just said, thanks everybody for joining us today, and thanks certainly to FP and Peter for getting up. Well, Peter for getting up so early, and FP for sticking around to do this. We really appreciate it. Some very interesting insights about social systems evidence, and certainly what's to come in that space as well. The recording from today's webinar will be made available in the next week or so on our website, so you can always go back and watch that or share with colleagues that may not have been able to get up at 5 a.m. Australia time to watch this webinar. And we are going to be taking a break from our top 10 webinar series for the next couple of months for the Canadian summer, but we'll be starting up again in September. So hope that you'll join us for some of those webinars at that point as well. Thanks again, FP and Peter, and have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.